Today on the Word Preacher Podcast, Enemies, an Ancient Visitor, and the Old Testament. I'm Brett Jensen, and this is the Word Preacher Podcast. All right, our Come Follow Me curriculum for this week will take us into section 2 of the Doctrine and Covenants and Joseph Smith history, verses 27 through 65. Let's go ahead and dig into some reading, starting in Joseph Smith history, verse 27. I continued to pursue my common vocations in life until the 21st of September, 1823, all the time suffering severe persecution at the hands of all classes of men, both religious and irreligious, because I continued to affirm that I had seen a vision. All right, when we look at this situation, we see it started out kind of rocky for Joseph Smith. And unfortunately, it never really got better for him. And it's kind of interesting when we look at how God calls prophets when they're a little bit older, because we've had some examples of that. It's a little bit different than when they're very young. We've had other examples of that. You have, young Samuel being summoned, and Eli tells him how to respond to the Lord. And when he's very young, he recognizes the voice of the Lord. Or you have Moses, who's already well into his life when he has a divine experience, a divine manifestation, sees the Lord face to face on Horeb. And I can't help but think that maybe the age does make a difference. It certainly seemed to make Moses a bit more wary of approaching others with news of his divine visitation. Moses addresses the Lord before he goes to anybody else. He expresses worries about explaining himself to others, that, he doesn't know the name of what am I going to tell them the name of the God who appeared to me is. And that's when God responded, I am that I am. Thus shall ye say unto the children of Israel that I am hath sent me unto you. Incredibly powerful response there. But obviously Moses was not 100% satisfied. His worries were not completely assuaged. He was still concerned with his oratory skills. He expressed that he would not be able to speak to the people. And the Lord expressed frustration with Moses. His anger was kindled against him, telling him that he knew that Aaron could speak well enough. Just use Aaron. And so the Lord kind of got frustrated because he was too hesitant to get started in doing what the Lord asked. Joseph, on the other hand, was kind of the opposite. He approached people who he considered to be upstanding and religious, preachers who he respected, with news of his vision, but he was immediately derided and attacked, and it led to a lot of difficulty in his life. Now, as he grew older, that habit of just being forthcoming certainly changed. He was a lot less likely to tell everyone the details of the hows and whos of how revelations were given, because he was repeatedly betrayed, stabbed in the back, and attacked. And so he felt like he probably needed to be guarded. And then when that occurs, when he starts being a little more careful about how and who he's talking to about revelations, well, then people are telling him he's being secretive and he's not being open, which is kind of ironic given when he was open, it wasn't any better for him. I think this is kind of an important observation that we read in this short verse, verse 27, because it's still applicable today. Some people, even if they seem nice, are not your friends. And that's not a justification for being paranoid. I'm not encouraging be cynical of everyone and everything or use unwarranted prejudice. Is certainly not an excuse for cruelty, but it does mean that sometimes a person who represents themselves as, oh, I just want to ask a question, or I just care about the truth, is actually not wanting to just ask a question and cares nothing about the truth. They may be more interested in making you look foolish or just getting you to agree with them, trying to manipulate your behavior. Jesus himself was approached by all sorts of different people, and he had the power to recognize some of those who approached him with very kind words, calling him good master, and flattering him by telling him that he, was speaking truly and would not lead astray. He could tell when they secretly wanted to discredit him. Joseph, young as he was still learning about trust, lessons that he would be taught repeatedly and unpleasantly throughout his life. Be careful about sharing things of a sacred nature. Jesus himself taught to avoid giving that which is holy to dogs, or casting your pearls before swine. He also counseled to beware of false prophets, which would come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they would be ravening wolves. Well, some of God's knowledge is universally applicable and important that every human being understand or have an opportunity to receive, for example, faith, penitence, and baptism, helping us bring miraculous peace and forgiveness from God and setting us on a covenant path to God. That's something everyone needs. Other knowledge is deliberately hidden. Consider how Jesus himself taught in parables so that only some individuals would even know what he was talking about. How many times did Jesus tell his own apostles that they did not understand, that they did not have eyes to see, that they had little faith? It's not that God was keeping secrets. It's that God wanted people to be in a position to use the knowledge he offered. And if you receive revelation, perhaps testimony meeting is not the place to rehearse the details. Now, it can be, but it might not be. God looks at how we treat sacred things before offering us more sacred things. We recall the words of a parable Jesus taught: Thou hast been faithful over a few things, thou shalt be made ruler over many things. Followers of Jesus Christ will always have enemies, and it's foolish to pretend otherwise. All right. On the 21st of September, 1823, Joseph Smith was visited by the angel Moroni, who had sealed up the gold plates on which the Book of Mormon was engraved more than 1,000 years before that. Let's look at some reading. These are verses 33 through 35 in Joseph Smith history. He called me by name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Moroni, that God had a work for me to do, and that my name should be had for good and evil among all nations, kindreds, and tongues, or that it should be both good and evil spoken of among all people. He said that there was a book deposited, written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent, and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, as delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. Also, that there were 2 stones in silver bows, and these stones, fastened to a breastplate, constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim, deposited with the plates. And the possession and use of these stones were what constituted seers in ancient or former times, and that God had prepared them for the purpose of translating the book. Okay. So, of course, Joseph's name is both good and evil spoken among all people. That is 100% accurate. The plain doctrine of Jesus Christ is absolutely contained in the Book of Mormon. Also 100% accurate. I think one thing that we get from this that's kind of interesting is that the translation was not going to be done like other translations that he would later perform or attempt. This was to be done using a unique technique with tools prepared specifically to this book. I think that's kind of important because later Joseph Smith would be involved in other translations that were not performed using the same methods. Even Joseph Smith translation, while spiritually inspired and given by revelation, was not performed using the same methods. And later, Joseph Smith would study a variety of languages and attempt to understand various records, some of which were real and some of which were fakes given to him. And he used secular approaches that compare symbols and contexts rather than dictate an exact intended meaning via seership. And that's kind of important. The Book of Mormon is different. The way we received the Book of Mormon is different. After Moroni's visit, he immediately reappeared and repeated his message, also repeating warnings for not being faithful to the task that was being given to him, and other prophecies about the future. Moroni's second visit was immediately followed by a third, repeating the same message again, warning about the temptation to use the plates for their intrinsic value rather than their spiritual value. And then at the close of that vision, Joseph realized that the sun was about to rise and he needed to wake up and perform his daily work. But he hadn't slept at all. He had had 3 long visions that lasted the whole night. And as he attempted to perform his work, it was clear he did not feel well. Due to exhaustion, he started to come home. He was climbing over a fence. He collapsed before he made it. And when he came to, Moroni was back. The angel repeated again his message and counseled him to share this vision with his father. He did so, and his father supported him, counseled him to do as the angel had directed. Valuable insight that Joseph Smith Sr. had no problems believing that angels could come, that God could speak. Support from his family was very important. So he did what the angel asked. He went to a nearby hill. He used a stick to create a lever, pulled up a large stone, found the plates, but he was unable to take them. And immediately he saw the angel Moroni and was counseled by him to come back each year until the time came to receive the plates. Sometimes he would have different instructions given to him, counsel to bring someone with him. There were a number of things that he received each year as he came back. But rather than dwell on some of those details, I'd like to talk about the general theme of why was it critical for Moroni to repeat his message so many times? And I think there's multiple correct answers to that. Joseph needed to remember the details, and some of which we will discuss in our next point. But Joseph also needed to understand that God had very specific requirements that were to be met. God was not interested in finding someone who would give excuses about why they couldn't do it or didn't do it. God wanted him to actually do it, to do what he asked. And I think that this is really applicable. Sometimes the lessons that we receive seem repetitive. A person may find church services or scriptures, prayer, other study, many other aspects of worship to become tedious and repetitive at times. And they may be frustrated that they're not getting anything new. It's probably worth it to consider how carefully we remember and actually live these teachings that are being repeated. And also to consider how frequently we offer excuses for not doing it. Receiving something new, frequently, as it did with Joseph Smith, requires mastering something old. Speaking of something old, there's some content that Moroni gave to Joseph Smith that I'd like to discuss. Most notably, Section 2 of the Doctrine and Covenants. As Joseph Smith history records it, because it contains the same text, he explains that he quoted Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, but he quoted them a little differently, as follows. Behold, I will reveal unto you the priesthood by the hand of Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall plant in the hearts of the children the promises made to the fathers, and the hearts of the children shall turn to their fathers. If it were not so, the whole earth would be utterly wasted at his coming. Now, the original passage, for context, is also in the Book of Mormon, in 3 Nephi chapter 25, given to the Nephites by Jesus Christ himself. And it reads as follows. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Now, there's some important insights that we gain with this alternate version that is recorded in Section 2. First, the priesthood was going to be revealed. This isn't just like an appearance of a great prophet, a phenomenal prophet. This is a promise from God, one of the first promises that God gives to Joseph Smith after the first vision is about the priesthood, the authority to act in the name of God. Some aspect of this was coming. Moroni's version also shows that God will actively assist in the effort of helping children's hearts turn to their fathers. It's not just the hearts of the fathers will turn to their children, the heart of the children will turn to their fathers. He shall plant in the hearts of the children the promises made to the fathers. This active role implies that this spirit of Elijah that we sometimes talk about as members of the church is God. It's the Spirit of God. It's the Holy Ghost who is actively persuading us, pleading with us to help establish his kingdom, not only for those of us who are here, but for those of us who need an opportunity on the other side of the veil. The consequences of not doing this are natural consequences. The whole earth will be utterly wasted at his coming. It's not something that God could reasonably be expected to opt out of. That's also kind of important to consider. There's something that we're missing that is making us quite vulnerable. And the Lord is going to extraordinary lengths to try and help that vulnerability disappear. Phenomenal verses that were revealed through the angel Moroni. But it may seem a little bit out of place to present, especially to someone who's meant to translate the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon contains something more along the lines of the original. Why do it? Why did Moroni give him this? And I think there's a lot of right answers, but I'm going to kind of focus in one direction. It's one of several passages that Moroni quoted from the Old Testament. There's some from Isaiah, some from Joel. There's a New Testament passage that, when you look at it in Acts, is actually an Old Testament prophecy that refers to Moses. And this is important because a lot of people, even today, have this idea that the Old Testament is fulfilled, that Moses may have been important for his time, but somehow, when Jesus came, he became a newer, gentler, softer God than the I Am of the Old Testament. And the Book of Mormon absolutely refutes this idea. Moroni coming and giving these passages absolutely refutes this misconception. In some ways, you could even consider the Book of Mormon a flashing neon arrow pointing to the Old Testament, saying, remember all these covenants and promises? They still matter. This was also an important parallel being established between how New Testament apostles helped to repair the damage done by apostasies after the old prophets, after Malachi, and how latter-day apostles would have similar responsibilities of repairing damages done by apostasies that had been done more recently. God, in either of these cases, has always been the same. His goals, his love, his power have always been the same. In the end, Moroni did not just come with orders. He came with knowledge that was intended to point us towards something ancient and wonderful. Moroni repeated his message over and over so that Joseph would be able to relate these teachings to the rest of us, that he would be able to recall very specific details. The lessons of prophets in the 1800s AD or the 1800s BC can help prepare us to deal with those who would tear us down and access a real, a genuine divine power that can save us, the power of Jesus Christ. We appreciate all the support for the Word Preacher podcast. Next week, we will look at sections 3 through 5, the field white, all ready to harvest. Of course, there is a ton that we did not cover in this week's reading. Please study this individually and with your family. And as always, fight on.